Welcome to Strange and Mysterious World, the Christmas edition. We're going to be bringing Father Damon on in a few seconds to chat about Christmas. So yeah, well, let's bring him on, man.
Oh man, sorry, dude, I forgot my hat.
Cool.
I'm on a job in Madikwe Game Reserve, so I don't have my hats. I don't have any.
50,000 rand a night, and they don't have your fucking Wi-Fi shit.
No, the most fanciest lodge there is in South Africa. Yeah, it's like 50,000 rand a night, and the internet's the crappiest ever. The lights went off 3 times, so yeah, it's clearly still in Africa. And
load shedding.
No, I don't know what it was. I think it just went off and on and off, and then I thought, oh my god, I'm never gonna be able to do this podcast. I don't have my sound stuff here, so crap. Okay, here's Damon. He's coming in.
Radio, man.
Strong, coming in strong.
Coming in.
Father Damon.
Father Damon. Buongiorno, come sta?
Buonasera.
Well, it's almost time for Buon Natale, eh?
Almost.
Father Damon,
yeah.
Nice to see you again, man.
And very nice to see you guys. Sorry about the technical things. I don't know, this little device of mine seems to give a lot of problems, but it seems like we're up and we're running.
Yeah, 100%. Very happy about that, man. So, Father, tell us, man, Christmas. What's it all about?
Okay, well, first off, let's start off just with an intro. The introduction to the last podcast we did just mentioned something that wasn't exactly accurate.
Yeah.
I think, Will, you said that the Liberal Catholic Church and the Theosophical Society are related. We're not related. Our founding bishops were also members of the Theosophical Society. So there is a little bit of a crossover, but we're not related at all. They're completely independent institutions. But a number of liberal Catholics are also members of the Theosophical Society, as am I. But they're not officially related. So they are independent bodies.
Okay, great.
So now we are entering into what we in the church call the Advent season. We're already three Sundays into the Advent season. Yeah. This coming Sunday will be the 4th Sunday in Advent, and then, of course, Wednesday will be Christmas Day. And as we spoke about before, and as I gave with my sermon on Sunday, was looking at the narrative that we've gotten, this 2,000-year-old narrative that we've heard about since we were children, the story of the baby Jesus born in Bethlehem, the biblical story, and then you look at it on a literal level, the story that's come down to us that people believe, and then you take Christ's own directions, and he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And when he spoke to his disciples and said, to you is given the secrets of the kingdom, but to these people, they must learn in parables. In other words, there's a split form of instruction for his closer disciples. They were given a special instruction. And then for the normal, everyday people, they were taught through allegory and through, symbolic language. Yes, precisely. Not that the parables are anything but extremely profound, especially that parable of the prodigal son, which basically sums everything up. So as we said at my sermon on Sunday to my congregation, we look at the narrative from the literal perspective. We know that Judea existed. It was at that time part of the Roman Empire. We know that King Herod was a client king of the Roman Empire. We know that there were procurators and governors, and that they did actually call census of the population. And if we also know that a censorship or a census, when a country calls a census or an empire calls a census, it's for taxation purposes. Empires are about money. Empires are about control and taxation. And so we have the story where the angel appears to Mary, and tells her that she's going to conceive of the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, even though he knows he's not the biological father, accepts this, and they are required to go from Nazareth, where they were living, to the city of Bethlehem in Judea, because both Mary, and Joseph were both direct descendants of King David. And so that was in Judea, in modern-day Israel, and they had to travel to the city of Bethlehem for the census. And we hear the story that they get there, And when they get there, unfortunately, because of this, there's no room in the inn. And so Jesus is born in a stable, which is the only place they can find, and he's laid in a manger, and an angel appears to the humblest of men, the shepherds, to come to his birth. But the angel or the stars also directed the most noble of those men at that time, the Magi, the Zoroastrian priests in Babylon at that time, and they made the journey because astrologically they had been told that a king was about to be born, and they arrive and they give their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the three kingly gifts, and Jesus Christ is born. But because of the politics of the situation, they are immediately in danger and have to flee. And where do they flee to? They flee to Heliopolis in Egypt, the city of initiates. So that's the literal figure, the literal interpretation that we have. It doesn't mention when Jesus was born at all, but we'll talk about that later. But then we have the figurative interpretation. And the figurative interpretation is a lot more interesting, in my personal opinion, because you have a setting. You have an extremely humble place, a stable. You have animals in the stable representing the lower nature, our human lower nature, the animalistic nature. We eat, drink, mate, and defend in the same way that animals do. But are we a little bit more? Have we got a higher consciousness? Yes, indeed. And there you have the man Joseph, who represents the ideal candidate for initiation, a man who is committed, first of all, that's the most important thing, who believes, and he's a moral and ethical man, a true candidate for further initiation. And he presents himself. And you have Mary, who represents the soul, that higher aspect, the intuitive aspect. And above that, you have the star, which represents the spirit. So when the spirit, the soul, and the personality are in order and in alignment, then something miraculous can happen. Then very softly, very gently, in the depths of night, with infinite subtlety, something is born. Awareness, the divine consciousness. Slowly, this is born within us. The birth of the Christ principle within us. This realization of divinity. But it is very, very fragile. Very fragile. And it is so very easily distracted by the cares of the world. And that is what is represented by Herod, wanting to wipe out any challenge to his throne. And so they have to leave. They leave and they go to, ironically, Heliopolis, which the ancient Egyptians called On, which was the city of initiation. So the city of the sun, of the god Horus. And so this makes a connection. And of course, from Heliopolis, you can see the great pyramids of Giza. But it also represents that the most humble, in a very humble place. The true divine is always humble. It's never bombastic. It's never overwhelming. It's truly subtle and humble, and yet completely unavoidable. It cannot be gainsaid. And the shepherds come. They invited to come. The most humblest of men. These are outies. These are men that spend their entire days outside looking after the sheep. The most humblest of men. And also the most noble of men. The most learned. The initiates. Those astrologer priests. Those are the two that are invited. And of course, the gifts that they bring. Gold, representing secular authority of a king. Frankincense, representing the gift of a priesthood. What do priests do? They offer incense. And the third, which is myrrh. Myrrh was used to embalm bodies. It's an antibacterial. And so that represents prophecy and prophesies Christ's sacrifice and death. And you will see very often in the old days, the popes were crowned with a triple diadem. They were crowned with a diadem that contained 3 crowns. And those are the 3 crowns. The crown of secular kingship, the crown of the high priest, and the crown of prophecy. And that's thrice majestic, and that's what they were crowned with, and that is what is represented in that story. So you have the literal interpretation that we've heard since we were children. Now you have a figurative interpretation where everything has a symbol. And then, why do we insist that it must be the 25th of December and no other time will do, even though nothing indicates that that was the case? Because a very important astrological event happens and can be seen from the earth. Remember, in ancient times, there was no television. People weren't glued to screens. The sky, with all the wonderful stars, there was no light pollution. The people looked up at the sky and saw a myriad of stars and stories and mythology within those stars. And at that time, on the 22nd of December in the northern hemisphere, is the time of the winter solstice, where the sun is the most further in the south. So it's the coldest time, the longest night. And then the sun stops moving north and stops moving south. Yeah, in the south, we see it in the south, stops moving south, and remains in position for 3 days. Always the 3 days. Remember, this points to Easter now. He died for 3 days, and then he rose again on the third day. And then on the third day, which is the 25th, it starts its journey slowly north again. And you've passed the shortest night in the northern hemisphere, our longest night, of course, in the southern hemisphere, that is our summer solstice. In the northern hemisphere, it's the winter solstice. But there's more to the story, because if you look up at the evening sky on the 25th of December, you'll see, if you look directly to the east, you will see the great constellation of Orion. It's the only constellation that looks like a man. It's a man standing there, and around his midriff is a belt made of 3 stars, Al-Nitak, Mintaka, and Al-Nilam, the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And you have that old Christmas carol that comes along. It says, "We 3 kings of Oriental are. We are," and they travel south. And if you follow the 3 stars in Orion's belt, directly down, you will come to the great star Sirius. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. It's as bright sometimes as some of the planets. It's the brightest star, and directly below that star, if you draw a line down to the horizon, that is where the sun, the new sun, will be born on the 25th. And so you have this astrological symbolism. Now, you may be aware of this, but Robert Bauval, early in the beginning of this century, discovered that, he postulated the theory that there's a sky-ground correlation theory between the 3 pyramids of Giza and Orion's belt. And I'm sure you're all aware of that. And it actually does fit, because the one star is slightly offset, which is an odd pattern to follow, but it seems to be. And so it seems that this is ancient mystery, ancient knowledge that has been handed down. And we still have that, the 3 kings, the 3 stars, guiding us to where the Son of God is born. And so only at that time, only on the 25th of December, does that astrological aspect fall into play. So it must be on the 25th of December. Whether or not that's the reality in literal history, it must always be that. So there you have, in a nutshell, the literal interpretation, what we know for facts, historical facts, the figurative interpretation, the symbology. And if you look at the narrative, it's absolutely full of symbolism. You can't deny that that's full of symbolism. And then you have an astrological explanation. You've got all these 3 things tying up together. So a very important time. The solstices and the equinoxes are very, very important. Those change of seasons that we go through, 4 seasons of the year. Very, very important times. And so this is the story and the narrative that we get, because of everything else, it must be a story of hope, of rebirth, of renewal, of something beautiful coming into the world. And that is actually what the narrative seems to imply.
So is that a pagan? So the symbolism in the winter solstice and all of that, is that a pagan thing that they brought in, and then they thought, like, okay, well, now we got to do the Christian thing and the pagan thing, and now we mix it together, and now we make
instead of saying a pagan thing, let's rather say very ancient wisdom, very ancient knowledge. Yes, as a new religion, Christianity absolutely did assimilate all kinds of traditions, and we can see that, for example, with our Christmas tree that we love so much. Very people know the truly macabre origin of the Christmas tree at the great temple at Uppsala in Sweden, the great tree on which every 9 years the 9-fold offering was made to Odin, the king of the gods, which included all animal sacrifices and humans too. And they were hung in the tree just as we hang decorations in the Christmas tree. So these things have been assimilated. It's not only that. We know, for example, in Easter, the Easter egg comes from an ancient Egyptian belief of the renewed life. The word Easter itself, Yostre, was the Germanic goddess of the moon. And if you look at the moon on a full moon, what's the shape you see on the moon? A bunny rabbit. So yes, it's assimilated all of this. Let's not necessarily call it pagan. Let us call it ancient wisdom that has all been assimilated into the story. And as long as it adds to the story, as long as it provides background and symbology, etc., it's good. It's not necessarily bad. Just because a new religion comes along doesn't mean that old knowledge is wrong. The old knowledge is still there. And even as Christ himself says, I don't come to change the law, but to fulfill it. So we need to understand that the New Testament is a fulfillment of an ancient testament that went before. And so if we look at these things, I believe that you see all kinds of new things. And of course, Easter has exactly the same kind of, that narrative also is peppered with symbolism. And if you look deeply beneath the surface, those things become apparent. And so, as we were talking about previously, religion is like an onion. And for the people, the simple folk, the superficial, the surface is good enough. But for people that want to look deeper, and you're encouraged to do so, let him who has ears to hear, hear. You look deeper and deeper, and there is true meaning. The teachings of Christ are profound. There is no doubt about that. The story of his parables are profound. This was a true divine intercession, manifested through the man Yeshua, Mashiach. That's my personal belief anyway. But the symbolism in it, the things that he taught can't be questioned. They're beyond questioning. And so this does represent, in my personal opinion, a divine intercession, which is taking place on multiple dimensions at once, you know, and this is actually what we teach. So looking deeply, this is mystical. This is the mystical Christianity, the original Christianity that I believe was there before the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where Christianity seems to have been reinvented. It seems very much to me that what Jesus was teaching and what his disciples belonged to was a kind of an initiation school within the Judaism of that time. And so metaphor and allegory were very much used and is very much a part of the language. But do we really understand that 2,000 years later? Well, here is a suggestion, and it's just a suggestion because we don't know anything for 100% sure. This is a suggestion, and it works if you look at this suggested symbolism.
Great. So, Father Damon, just sorry, but to go back on the tree, how did the tree, so that was, that tree, how did it get into Christmas? Like, how did it?
Okay, well, look, you've got sacred groves throughout all of history, not only in Northern Europe, in the Holy Land itself, in Syria, in all those places, there were religions that had sacred groves with sacred trees. And then, of course, if you go into Europe, you see things like the Druids who honored the various trees, especially the oak tree. And if you look at Northern Europe, etc., you have at that time the Yule tree, the Yule log. Of course, it's the darkest time of the year. It's deep winter. It's the longest night. And of course, you build fires and you try to brighten things up. And trees have a magnificent symbolism. Look at Norse mythology with the great tree Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, the world tree, upon which were the 9 realms, you know, that were on the tree. And the tree was the way that they were linked. So there's always this tree symbolism. And especially for evergreen trees like the pines, the different kinds of pines, and that kind of family that remain evergreen, which seem to defy death and have a kind of immortality within them. They don't die like deciduous trees in winter. They remain, their leaves remain green and they continue. So that was magnificent symbolism that came in about rebirth and immortality and divinity even. And so that is where the tree symbolism came in, the idea of the Christmas tree. The pagans decorated sacred trees with offerings, and we still do that today. And as I told my congregation, we are not Puritans. I'm not a Puritan. So, and they complain, people complain and say, oh, it's become so yeah, you know, Christmas, they start advertising Christmas already in October. Yes, but that's the society that we live in. And yes, as long as you understand the spiritual message, it's fine to indulge everything else and have a good time, especially with friends and family and that kind of thing. That's fine. Do them both. As long as you understand this is actually what it is. This is the spiritual significance. Then you can indulge the other parts as well, which we all love. And I love Christmas myself. I watched Scrooge over and over again. Absolutely love that story in all its different versions. So as long as we're getting the message, William, as long as we're getting the message and we're looking deeply and we're starting to see and starting to realize certain things, this divine consciousness needs to be born within us very, very subtly, very gently, very fragile. And the slightest thing around us in this world distracts us from this quest that we are on, this divine quest of self-realization. And this seems to me this wonderful story of the birth of Jesus. Did it happen historically? We have no idea of confirming that. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. So it always seems just the divine always manifests extremely humbly, very humbly. Those of you that are aware, for example, have done comparative religion studies, know, for example, from the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Lord Krishna, the 8th avatar of Lord Vishnu, took birth very humbly. He was born in a prison. And there were very similar things. There was also stars in the sky that were indicating that a divine incarnation was about to happen. So it's not just in the Christmas story. There's a lot of religious narrative from all over the world that seems to bear the same thing and seems to also be connected with that period of time around the 25th of December, which was also a Mithraic celebration, was the Roman Saturnalia, because of the astrological alignments and the time of the year. And so to line all of these things up is not necessarily wrong. It just shows a depth of understanding and knowledge. So we say that we incorporated pagan knowledge. Oh, absolutely. Christianity spread so quickly and so far because it was prepared to incorporate things and change things. Yes, it absolutely did. But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Tell us, Father, Saint Nicholas.
Yes.
Yeah, what's the story with him?
Well, St. Nicholas originally started out as the Bishop of Myra. Now, Myra is a city on the south coast of Turkey, what was then part of the Hellenistic world and is now part of Turkey. And St. Nicholas was known as a benefactor. And he came from a very wealthy family. And he was able to, what actually started it all off, he was very generous with money and with gifts, but where this actually all came from was there were a number of very poor families that weren't able to supply dowries to their daughters. And so they remained unmarried. And St. Nicholas apparently threw bags or purses with gold coins, enough dowries, over the walls of these houses so that these ladies could have dowries and were able to get married. So that's actually where it comes from. And he was also became the patron saint of a number of things. One of the most important, of course, is children. And the 6th of December is still St. Nicholas's Day, where he is, and of course, St. Nicholas became Santa Claus. Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, it came from the same thing, and the Father Christmas figure. But it actually came from a real bishop, the Bishop of Myra. Later on, he turns up at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD in Constantinople, one of the many bishops that went there to debate for 2 years to draw Christianity together and to come to conclusions and decisive dogma regarding Christianity, because Christianity in those days was not like it is today. There were a whole lot of different interpretations, including Gnostic interpretations and various other ideas. And in fact, the Emperor Constantine kept them in this debate for 2 years. And it got very heated at many times. And twice, apparently, the imperial guard had to be called in to break the bishops up, who had tackled each other physically over disagreements. And apparently St. Nicholas himself had his nose broken in one of those brawls. So this is where St. Nicholas comes from, and his association with the patron saint of, amongst other things, children and kindness and bringing gifts as a bishop of the church. And of course, the whole Father Christmas idea came from that St. Nicholas himself, who was a real living bishop. And he was interned in the Roman city of Bari in southern Italy. And ironically, when they dug up his remains a decade or two ago, his skull seemed to have the features of exactly that snub nose, broad forehead, broad face of that we have for Father Christmas to this very day. So he was a real historical figure. He took part in the debates at the Council of Nicaea, which formulated modern Christian doctrine, the beginning of the actual church, where everyone could understand. People don't seem to realize that, I mean, many things that we take for granted came very close to be excluded. The inclusion of the Book of Revelations was almost taken out of the canonical Bible. Can you imagine that? It wasn't very popular because people didn't understand it. But the Book of Revelations is extremely revealing, is very, very important, but they almost voted to take it out. There were a lot of things, a lot of dogmas and things that were almost included or almost not included. It was the bishops at the Council of Nicaea, under the direction of the Emperor Constantine, who himself was not a Christian. He was baptized on his deathbed. So there's differing stories about that. He's a saint in many of the churches, but the fact of the matter was this man was a pagan and was only baptized on his deathbed, apparently.
But he didn't want to get baptized, didn't he fight them? He said he didn't want to get baptized, and then they had to wait until
something like he belonged to, like many Roman soldiers, he belonged to a mystery cult called the Mithraic cult, which was part of the old Zoroastrian religion. They also met on Sundays. They had secret meals, and they also celebrated the 25th of December. And he was on a level of initiation called the Sol Invictus level, the invincible sun. So he was a pagan. He was one of 4 emperors of the Roman Empire at that time. They were, the Roman Empire was split between the Eastern and the Western Empire. And in both the East, there were 2 contenders. And in the West, there were 2 contenders. And he was one of these 4 contenders. And before he actually took the throne and moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople or Byzantium, he had to defeat all 3 of the other emperors. And then he established his new capital once he had done that in Byzantium, in Constantinople. And then he said, okay, we're going to have this religion and we're going to draw everyone together. But before we can make the empire Christian, we have to understand and decide what Christianity is. So he called all the bishops from all over the known world at that time, and they met at the Council of Nicaea, which is also in southern Turkey. And that is where modern Christianity actually came from. The bishops got together, fought over it, debated it, and made certain determinations, which came down to us to this very day with the church. So
Saint Nicholas is in that Council of Nicaea now for 2 years.
Absolutely.
Busy fighting each other, breaking each other's noses, and he's
yes, the Imperial Guard was called in twice in 2 years. So they were there for 2 years.
And he's like, guys, no, I've got this great idea. Okay, I am going to be this guy that's going to, on the 25th, I'm going to fly on a sled with these reindeers, and I'm going to go down the chimneys, and I'm going to put
that idea came along much later. Much later, that idea came along, but the idea of St. Nicholas on the 6th of December was right from the very beginning. But of course, the idea of Father Christmas and the whole idea with the North Pole and all that came in much later and incorporated a lot of Nordic and Finnic traditions and ideas that were brought into it. So Christianity, as we know it today, incorporates many different things of today. That's why it actually grew so fast, because it was prepared to incorporate things and local beliefs and customs into its expansion. So it's not quite as straight.
That wasn't why he got his. It wasn't why he got his nose broken, because I thought if he proposed that to the guys, they were just like, and then they punched him, and they said
he got his nose broken in a fight, in a debate at the Council of Nicaea, apparently. So it wasn't an easy thing, and these guys did not agree with each other. They did not agree with each other. The emperor had to force them to stay there for 2 years and to come to an agreement about what this religion actually was. Certain of these things were not established. Things we take for granted were not yet established. The 4 Gospels, there were many Gospels originally in Christianity, and we have access to them since we found the codices in Egypt in 1947. We found the Nag Hammadi library. And only then did we have access to the full text of these alternative Gospels, my favorite of which is the Gospel of St. Thomas, which is a profound, deeply profound, very advanced material. So they had to come to terms and decide what is canonical, what is not canonical. And one of the most important books in the whole of the New Testament, the book of Revelations, the Apocrypha, the Apocalypse of St. John. Apocalypse, a word misunderstood. Apocalypse in Greek means revelation, revealed. Doesn't mean the end of the world. It means what is revealed. And this was almost not included. So we know that these things were debated. The number of the sacraments, the way the sacraments were supposed to be performed and administered, all of these things were decided at that council. And many different traditions were brought into synchronicity at that time. And many things were excluded, including the Gnostic Gospels, which were declared anathema and removed. And then we had only 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The reasons why it was only taken as 4 were bizarre. Some of them were really bizarre. Like there's 4 directions, so there should be 4 Gospels. So it wasn't really. Some of them, I think, were chosen because they were very straightforward and easy, whereas Gnostic Gospels were difficult for uninitiated people to understand. But we know that this is the process that actually took place.
And Thomas, why did they took Thomas out? Why do you think they took the Gospel of Thomas?
Look, we knew that these Gospels existed because especially Bishop Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, before Christianity was adopted by the Roman Empire, in the 200s, Irenaeus was speaking against the Gnostic Gospels. Remember that at that time, the Christians were being persecuted by the Romans. It wasn't yet Christianity hadn't been adopted by the Roman Empire. And so they had to say, well, you people are giving up your lives for your beliefs. We need to understand and we need to determine what it is that you're actually giving your lives up for. And so this is actually what happened. So you had Irenaeus referring to the Gospels, but we never ever knew the Gospels in there. We never had the complete texts. But then in 1947 in Nag Hammadi in Egypt, this collection of alternative Gospels was found, and they are authentic. And would you believe, just a few years ago, one of them was found, the Gospel of Judas, if you'd believe that. So it seems that original Christianity is not what we have today.
Sorry, carry on, Father.
And so there were lots of different interpretations and versions in the early church. That's not the idea we have today. That's not the understanding of Christianity. That it's very straightforward. It never had that path. It was a difficult journey, in fact, and it had to be fused together, and it had to be incorporated by these men, these people, these bishops at the Council of Nicaea that were meeting in almost like a conclave kind of situation, because they weren't allowed to leave until they'd come to a conclusion. And that's where we get our modern forms of Christianity from.
So just, Father, the Gnostics, because wasn't the Gnostics, well, I've just heard this, I don't know if it's true, but their belief is that you could find God through yourself. It's within you. And then
yes.
And you didn't have to go through a clergyman or a church or a bishop or whatever to find the divine. And they didn't like that because then there was no like power structure. So
the term Gnostic or Gnos comes from the Greek gnosos. Gnosos, which means knowledge, as opposed to agnosos. I don't know. Agnostic, I don't know. Gnostic, I know. And they came from a dualist kind of background with a dualist idea of the universe. And in fact, we know that this was part of early Christianity because John the Baptist, who was a relative of Jesus, and his predecessor, who baptized him, and when John the Baptist was beheaded at the request of Salome to Herod, then Jesus stepped into the role as the next in line of some kind of an initiation school. And we know that the original teachings were Gnostics because those disciples of St. John the Baptist still exist today. They're known as Mandaeans. And at the destruction of the temple, when the Romans destroyed the temple, they were amongst the people that moved away from the Jordan River down into modern-day Iraq, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they are there to this very day. And the Crusaders, when they got to the Holy Land, encountered these people. They called them the Christians of St. John. And they discovered, yes, these are the descendants of John the Baptist, and they are absolutely Gnostic. They believe that this world is controlled by the demiurge, which is a false kind of flawed God, that is not the real God, and that the world is flawed, and that we come from a higher realm called the pleroma, and we have fallen or been entrapped into this lower realm where we struggle, and we need to obtain release and ascension from out of this lower realm. That was their belief. So they were dualist. That this world.
The Buddhists kind of believe certain thing like that. You got to get out of the reincarnation trap. Or Buddha said
precisely. So there's a lot of crossover, for example, with Hindu and Buddhism, etc. That we're stuck in a cycle of birth and continuous birth and death and reincarnation, but we are stuck nonetheless, and we are held, as it were, in this realm. These archons, or rulers, as they were called, over which the demiurge is the Lord, created this false realm, in this low realm, lured the souls in here and tries to hang on to us. They benefit somehow from our souls being entangled in this lower realm, and that the whole purpose of life is to escape. And so that was the original Gnostic idea. And they had some very interesting ideas, and you can take hours going into the different schools of Gnosticism. That, in a nutshell, though, is what they believe. And a lot of the teachings of Jesus seem to tie up with that idea. And the Mandaeans still have that. The descendants of the disciples of John the Baptist still exist. For example, when Christ says, "My Father's kingdom is not of this world." And he goes into a number of things. He who loves this world will lose it, and he who loses his life in this world for my sake shall find it. It's all a very dualist teaching. And so there's a distinct possibility that actually the early form of Christianity, what Jesus and John the Baptist and that were teaching, was a very Gnostic form of a teaching, not what we automatically assume that it was, and that the escape or the transcendence from this lower realm of entanglement is actually our purpose. So there's a lot in Christianity that actually speaks to that. For example, when Christ goes into the desert for 40 days, and it's always 40 days, that's a symbolic number, and the devil taunts him, and the devil takes him to the top of the temple, and he says, "All these kingdoms of the world I will give to you if you will bow down and worship." Now, the devil couldn't do that or deliver on that promise if he wasn't the ruler of all those realms. So in a Gnostic kind of way, the demiurge, the devil, rules over this world, but isn't the real God. He's a flawed version of the Godhead. And so we who come from a higher realm, the pleroma, need to extract ourselves from the cycle of endless birth and death and to return to the pleroma. The pleroma seems to have a lot in common with the Vaishnava Hindu Brahma Jyoti or Vishnu Jyoti, the light, the realm of light. Seems to come from the same thing. The words kind of mean the same thing. So, I mean, you can look at it. This is just a suggestion, by the way. And another thing that I must just remind you at this time is that these are my personal ideas. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Liberal Catholic Church. I can't do that. I don't have permission to do that. These are my personal suggestions. These are my personal ideas. And so we need to just be aware of that. These are things I'm suggesting as a possibility. And so people can hear them and take them seriously or reject them, because no one knows these things for sure. We can't guarantee anything. So we're looking at this material and we're saying, could it be this? Could it be that? What is your life experience? What do you suggest? What is your experience of the entire thing? And so
it's funny that you mentioned the 40 days and 40 nights, because Buddha also sat under the Bodhi tree for 40 days, 40 nights, and he gained enlightenment. But in the Gnostic tradition, is there any instructions? Do they say, do this to escape? Or is it just like, no, you hear doomed?
It's exactly the same thing that you get in the Eastern religions. You have to remove attachment to the lower nature. So the things that bind you and hold you into the lower realm, the lower nature, the animalistic aspect, needs to be transcended. And it can only happen through sacrifice of the lower nature. And Christ demonstrates that with his crucifixion. The ultimate crucifixion, sacrifice, is a crucifixion of his lower nature, his lower physical body, and he transcends. He's of transcendence. So the message is one of transcendence, very much in line, a little bit different, but in line with the message of Buddhism and certain forms of Hinduism, Vaishnava Hinduism, and that you need to transcend the lower nature, lose your attachment for the lower nature and the things that bind you to this world, and look towards the divine. And I think that is an essential aspect of many different religious traditions, not only this kind of Christianity, not only Hinduism and Buddhism, but Jainism as well. And, all the different schools that you have within those complexes. It's always one of the same message, to sacrifice the lower nature, to lose your attachment to the things of this world, and to raise your consciousness and awareness unto ascension and transcendence. The true nature, the true immortal aspect is the soul, and the voice of the soul is the conscience. Follow the conscience, follow your soul, and you'll be relieved and escape from this lower realm, where things are so imperfect, where subject to space and time, things fade and die and get sick, and so all the different flaws. We come from a higher level, we come from a higher divine center, and of course that's exactly what the story of the prodigal son talks about. The parable of the prodigal son, the father and the two sons, and the one son says, "No, I am restless. I want to go into the world. Give me my inheritance now." And the father gives him his inheritance, and he squanders it. And he goes into a lower form of life, and he experiences all the life, and he loses all of his money and all of his wealth, and he finds himself ultimately in a pigsty, feeding and eating the food of the pigs. And he wakes up and he realizes, this isn't where I come from, a really good place. I came from a place where even my father's servants lived much better than what I'm living here in the pigsty. And I need to lift myself up and go. And he raises himself up and he goes back, starts traveling back towards his father, which is where we all are now. Those of us that are seekers, we're on our quest to return back from whence we've fallen. And the father sees him coming from far away and runs out to meet him, and that is initiation. When that matchup comes, and then he returns to the father, and he's given authority, he's given a ring, and he's given new clothes, and there's a feast. So this soul which fell into the lower realm comes to the realization that it has fallen, decides to make a change, decides to return, which is what we seekers are doing now, and returns to the Father. The parable of the prodigal son, in a nutshell, is the story of existence, of human existence, how our souls fall, become entrapped in a lower realm, and then have to lift themselves up and return from whence they've fallen. And that is the cycle that we find ourselves in.
It's like the Amish. The Amish at the age of, I don't know, it was 18 or 21, they tell the kids, like, you got to go out into the real world now. And they go out and they party and they do drugs and they go nuts, and then they come back after they've lost everything. And so it's like in the Amish community, that's your baptism kind of thing. They send you out and then you come back.
Remember, in the early church and with John the Baptist, there was no infant baptism. John the Baptist, or Yachanan al-Suba, the Baptist al-Suba, was only for adults. It was only for a decision that you made as an adult, a decision of repentance, a decision which was part of the initiation. You're going to start a new life, and you're going to move on to new things. Now you're on your quest. It was an initiation baptism. We today in the church do infant baptism so that the infant souls are protected, etc. That was not the case during the time of John the Baptist and Jesus. They would never have done infant baptism. And the Mandaeans that exist and still return there, they have a baptism every week. Once a week you have your baptism, and then the Eucharist they use is one of bread and water, not bread and wine. So they are slightly different. They claim that John the Baptist was the Messiah and not Jesus. So you have all these divergent currents. But at the bottom of it all is always the same message, is always the same vector, that you have to actually move away from entanglement in the lower nature and raise your consciousness, raise your awareness, and move into higher realms and leave behind as a matter of sacrifice. And sacrifice is always necessary. If you think about when you launch a rocket, in order for that rocket to get into orbit, it's got to leave things behind. So the initial phase, once that's empty, that falls away, and another set falls away, and eventually you've just got a capsule in space orbiting the Earth, because it's had to, in order to get there, it's had to sacrifice all those other aspects. And it's the same thing with us. You have to sacrifice in order to make accomplishment. And crucifixion, of all things, represents liberation, salvation through sacrifice, particularly of the lower nature. And so this is the teaching. This is what Christ was not only teaching, but demonstrating in reality.
Do you think there's a connection? Sorry, Will. I was going back a little bit from your discussion where you were chatting about the stars of Orion's belt and the connection with the pyramids in Egypt. Do you think there's a connection in South America? Because at Teotihuacan, the three pyramids line up exactly the same as in Egypt. So there seems to be a connection between the two. So back to ancient wisdom, ancient kind of teachings, there seems to be there's a massive connection there.
Yes. So the ancients were very, very concerned with as above, so below, as we know from the Hermetica and from other traditions. And basically what happened in Egypt is that Egypt built the heavens on the earth. The pyramids represented stars, and they actually built heaven on earth at that time. And as they predicted, today we hardly understand what these things were. No, the great pyramids of Giza were never meant to be tombs. That is a modernist linear look at history. It's not a cyclical look at history. I don't believe personally that these monuments were built 4,500 years ago. Absolutely not. These are antediluvian monuments that existed from a previous high civilization that was wiped out by a flood that happened about 12,500 years ago. We know that flood happened. It's now called the Younger Dryas. We know that happened. Many of these things in South America, Teotihuacan being one of them, Pumapunku being another site, and Tiwanaku being another site, and of course Baalbek, the great platform at Baalbek. Many of these sites appear to have been antediluvian. They come from before the time of the flood. And Egypt particularly seems to have been an attempt to re-establish civilization. And so they built their civilization up around these monuments, claiming the glory that came from these ancient monuments, claiming to be the descendants of these gods and things. And that's what actually happened. I don't doubt that later on, once they've lost the mystery and what the pyramids were actually designed to do, once that knowledge had been lost, and it was just a mythical divine center, that they did try to bury pharaohs and things, and they tried to create a connection between their kings and this ancient civilization or the gods that went before. That's my personal interpretation. That's what I personally believe. Yes, the Sphinx is much older than just 4,500 years ago. Archaeologists and that will try very hard to block that, just as, I don't know if you know this, at Göbekli Tepe and the other tepes in Turkey, they've actually stopped excavation. The archaeologists have stopped. They've stopped it because what they're uncovering is challenging the entire linear idea of human development. They've actually stopped it. And we know that Weiss, probably the only inscriptions in the Great Pyramid, he actually probably wrote in there, and it was correct. He made a very important and significant spelling mistake that no ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic scribe would ever have done.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be an attempt by archaeology, mainstream archaeology, linear archaeology, and those that actually control the modern world that we're in, to deny this past and to try and eradicate this past. But the harder they try to do that, the more obvious it actually becomes. We now have scientific proof that there was a global inundation 12,500 years ago, which fits the narrative rather well, and that there is more than likely to have been high civilization before that. Graham Hancock is very convinced about that. Now, this isn't necessarily an ancient aliens thing. There might not have been ancient aliens. I mean, I love Zachariah Sitchin's work as well, but it's got nothing to do only with aliens. This could just have been previous high civilization, which appeared to have achieved a certain level of technology, just as the Bible claims that it was. You know, that had become very corrupted society, and so this happened and wiped it all away, and then we started again. And there's a distinct possibility that this deluge, this cataclysm, is actually cyclical and related somehow to cosmic events. And so they seem to have tried to incorporate warnings. Göbekli Tepe seems to be a warning that this happens from time to time. And yet all of a sudden it's all covered up. They're not going any further. They're not even trying anymore. They've covered it up. They've stopped excavating there. They've closed off the site, and they're not digging anymore. It looks like those particular ruins were buried deliberately, which also raises a lot of very strange questions. So this whole idea that we've grown up with this linear story of human evolution and development and civilization only arising around about 6,000 years ago, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, and then in Egypt and in the Indus Valley and those things, that seems to be getting challenged now quite heavily. A lot of evidence is coming to the surface which seems to indicate that that's not true history. History and time, we know, is cyclical. And so that's part of a bigger debate that's actually going on, which brings us to an understanding of how little we actually know for sure. So we make suggestions, we look at these things and we interpret them. But the reality of the fact is that we need to be humble, because it's amazing how little we actually know. We know almost nothing about who we are, what we are, when we are, and where we are. I mean, there's a whole theory now that we are holographic projection, that this world is a simulation. Elon Musk seems to hold that belief, and it's a distinct possibility that he's right. So where does initiation begin? It arises when you start asking these questions. Who am I? What am I? When am I? And where am I? And what am I doing here? Why are we here? What is this phenomenon of life that we have? The whole idea of evolution is being challenged because it seems like the rule is not evolution, but devolution. 99.9 recurring % of all life that arose on Earth has gone extinct. So things tend to devolve rather than evolve. That's according to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Complex systems break down. And it's only under very different situations that things build up. So we're starting to question all of these things now. And we don't claim to ever have any absolute knowledge or anything. Can't prove a thing. Do we know what happened 2,000 years ago in the Holy Land? Well, we've got this narrative that's come down, and certain historical things seem to indicate, there was a King Herod and his son, and there were client kings. Yes, there was a procurator in Judea in those days. All of that kind of did happen, and yes, it's a distinct possibility, but who knows anything for sure? We don't know very much. And so that's a bit of humble pie that we need to accept. So we're seeking, we're searching, and slowly we start to come to certain realizations and things like that. That is the birth of the Christ within us. That doesn't mean it didn't happen 2,000 years ago. It's not a replacement. It's just the same thing on different dimensions. It's multi-dimensional, just as we are.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, well, I really believe that those pyramids were actually built to just shoot us out of the prison planet, instead of, because it sounds
that's
like
one of the theories. That's one of the theories. They could have been initiation machines. They certainly were built with the tolerances of machinery, of technology, which you wouldn't expect from something like a tomb. So that doesn't actually make a lot of sense. They seem to have had a deliberate purpose, which the understanding of which was ultimately lost. And then, but they say with the older pyramids, the pyramids that they say are first dynasty, were actually imitations of those pyramids built by people that didn't quite understand what the purpose of the pyramid was. Saqqara and all of those places. The pyramids of Dashur and all those pyramids that were built, they say that were built before, but actually weren't built before. They were trying to imitate the pyramids at Giza. That's my personal belief. And they failed because half of them have fallen to pieces.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right there. I've always, our podcast way back, I think in season 1, we were actually talking about that. And my opinion was exactly as you said. The original 3 in Giza were the originals. Everything that came thereafter were tried to copy, couldn't do it. So they went to the easy way, the step pyramids, because that was the easy way to do it. So I think you're 100% right. Also remember now,
and I think what we think of as the ancient Egyptian religion seems to also bear this out. They lost the complete understanding of what the whole purpose was. And then their religion arose as a type of preparation for the afterlife, and mummification, a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation, elemental magic mixed into it. And that was actually what we think was high civilization, was actually the degenerate part of what was left over of the previous high civilization. The previous high civilization appears to have reached very, very high levels, not only technologically, but probably spiritually as well. And it's not the first time we've heard that the pyramids could have been initiation machines, which was a distinct possibility. Or they were, Tesla-style energy capacitors and generators that we have no understanding of. These people didn't understand that. It was lost knowledge, but they associated themselves with it in order to get the prestige of the ancient ones and ancient gods, to recreate civilization, So that seems to be a distinct possibility.
So we started on Christmas and we ended on the pyramids. I think that's amazing. I think we should decorate pyramids instead of the Christmas tree.
Well, the thing is to understand symbolism, to understand analogy and metaphor is a very human thing. And those ancient civilizations seldom spoke directly. They used metaphor. They used symbolic language. And once you understand that and you understand what they're getting through, we also know in modern secret societies and modern esoteric societies that symbolism plays an important role. Analogy, metaphor plays an important part in the initiation ceremonies of certain organizations, etc., that are illustrated. And we're familiar with that. We understand that and how powerful it actually is, how powerful ritual can actually be. So it's understandable in a way.
Fantastic. So Lee, you got to call this one The Truth Behind Christmas and the Pyramids.
We need to do one for Easter as well, because the symbolism within the Easter narrative is even more profound. I mean, if you go into it and you actually look at it, it's quite profound. But I think we should leave that for Easter.
I'd also like to, if it's cool with you and you got time, next time I'd like to chat to you about things that we just, when I spoke to you on the phone, things like the Book of Enoch, the other things that were very interesting stories there. So if you don't mind coming back into our next season next year, it would be fantastic to talk to you about this.
Damon, sorry, one last thing before we go. You said they found the Book of Judah now, the Gospel of Judah.
Gospel of Judas.
How do we know that people aren't just writing these things and like old paper or whatever to try and fake it just so they can make some?
These were the original. These were carbon-14 dated papyrus texts written in a certain style in the Coptic language, in the modern Coptic alphabet. They stopped using hieroglyphs and hieratic to write Coptic or Egyptian. They adopted a Greek-style alphabet, and so we know that they are authentic. They were tested. There's a wonderful documentary, National Geographic, on the Gospel of Judas. I suggest that you look it up. It's fantastic how that document was almost lost and how it was found again, how it was dated, and it is authentic.
It puts a very different spin on the actual story of Judas.
Well, it does. It's very Gnostic. According to the Gospel of Judas, it was Christ set Judas in place to betray him.
Yes.
So it's a very interesting take on things, and it raises a number of questions. But I mean, that's another whole program.
Yeah.
But just be aware, and you can go and look it up. You can look up the Gospel of Judas. I'm sure that you can find that National Geographic documentary. It's really worthwhile watching. It's an amazing story. And go and have a look at it. And you can actually buy it in the shop now, the Gospel of Judas. A lot of it is missing.
I've got it.
Yeah, I've also got it. A lot of it is missing, but it's definitely Gnostic and it is Christian. So very interesting. I think it was probably part of the Nag Hammadi, but then was lost from amongst it. My favorite will always be the Gospel of Thomas, which is extremely profound. And I suggest that people read that as soon as possible, because I think it is canonical in my mind. It certainly speaks very profoundly and shows a profound insight from Christ. So lots of things to cover, lots of things to look at. always open, but just suggesting, not no dogma, no doctrine, suggesting certain things. Is this possibly what it means? Could it mean that? Could it be something else? What do you think? That is the method and the technique that we use. But acquiring knowledge is very important, because unless you have knowledge, you can't have wisdom. You can't be wise if you don't have knowledge. You must have knowledge. That's represented by the fact that in Jesus, when he was 12, we found him in a temple debating with the scholars. At the age of 12, that's part of the 7-ray rosary. Knowledge, he acquired knowledge. Then comes wisdom by the grace of God, which comes from the soul. And then the pieces of the puzzle fit together and you make progress. So you must have knowledge.
Wisdom. So, Father Damon, where can people find you?
Well, we are on Facebook, the St. Albans Liberal Catholic Church. We're on Facebook. We post our sermons sometimes, and pictures, etc. And we are number 3 Observatory Avenue, St. Albans Liberal Catholic Church, more than 102 years old, dedicated in 1922. There were services being conducted on that property since 1918. So very old, very established. That's where we are. We also have a parish in Pretoria. We are Catholic. We are not Roman Catholic. We have the 7 sacraments. We say Mass every Sunday. And we have an unbroken apostolic succession from the Archbishopric of Utrecht, from the Catholic Church of Holland. So we are Catholic. We do the old form of the Mass. We never changed in 1962. So if you want to come and visit us, you are welcome at 10 o'clock every Sunday morning, or 9:45 rather, every Sunday morning. And we have lectures, we have debates. We are a mystical Catholic church. We are very much Catholic, and we are very much Christian. We're just not Roman Catholic.
Are you having a Christmas Mass? Are you having Christmas Mass, Father?
Oh, absolutely. On Wednesday, I will be saying the Christmas Mass, giving the Christmas message, and having a wonderful Christmas feast with my family. And I hope that everyone will take the advantage not only to understand the spiritual message of Jesus Christ, which is real, which is true, the true intervention, divine intervention through Jesus Christ, the Logos, the Word of God himself. Absolutely. Possibly just understood a little bit differently. And then enjoy the family, enjoy the love, enjoy the festivities of this wonderful time of the year. So to everyone, a very Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous New Year. I don't know what 2025 is going to bring us. Change, definitely. I don't want to say anything else, the state that the world's in. But enjoy yourself while you can. I'm not a Puritan. Enjoy yourself while you can.
You too, Father.
Be aware of the spiritual message.
Yeah, you too. You must have a fantastic Christmas as well. You and your family.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks, Father Damon. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll chat
Bye-bye.
This guy's so full of knowledge. He's got so much knowledge, dude. It's really fun. I love listening to him, man. Because he knows so much about things. He's got, you know what I mean?
And also like cross-religion. It's not just all about the Christian thing.
Yeah.
He knows about it all.
Which is very
fantastic.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, Pat, that's it
for
us tonight. And have a fantastic Christmas, you and your family, Pat. And to all of you people that are listening to us from around the world, I hope you guys have a fantastic Christmas. Please be safe. I hope you have a fantastic New Year's. And we will see you in the new year. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. And if you got this far in the video, like and subscribe.
Please.
If you got this far in the video, you must have liked it. I mean, cheapers. Otherwise, you must have just left it on in the background and like with reading a book or something in the other room. But please like and subscribe if you got this far.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers, buddy.